Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to 15 Minutes with Lori. Um, I just want to take a moment to express our sincere um, um, sadness over the loss of some of the homes in St. Louis and businesses, and even more so, the lives that were lost. So, prayers go out to all of them. But because of that, our subject this morning is going to be about loss. So, anytime a storm like this happens, reach out to your clients. Ask if they need anything. There are so many resources. The St. Louis Association of Realtors, they are gathering food and water and funds to try to help those in need as needed. But when you have a listing and you know that a bad storm has happened, reach out to them and make sure that the home is okay, especially if the home is vacant or if they live out of state. It's a good idea to go drive by the home and make sure that it's safe and sound. In our residential sale contract, we have paragraph 14 about loss. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and we're going to talk about it, okay? Risk of loss to the improvements of the property shall be borne by the seller until title is transferred. If any improvements covered by this contract are damaged or destroyed, seller shall immediately notify buyer or selling broker in writing of the damage or destruction, the amount of insurance proceeds payable, if any, and whether the seller intends to restore the property prior to closing. Let's see here. To its condition at the time of contract. In the event seller restores the property to its prior condition before scheduled closing and provides buyer with the proof of the repairs, buyer and seller shall proceed with the closing. So anytime that there is any type of damage, and doesn't even have to be weather related, if there's any type of damage during the transaction, so you've got a buyer, it's already under contract. So if any damage happens, then you immediately need to contact the buyer or the selling broker to let them know of the damage and the seller's intent to either repair or not to repair. Okay. Let's see where I lost my spot here. Buyer and seller shall, okay, here. In the event that the property is not to be restored to its prior condition by the seller before closing, seller shall immediately provide buyer or selling broker with a copy of the policies of insurance, the name and number of the agent for each of said policies, and written authorization, if needed, for buyer to communicate with the insurer. So you've got to be able, so if the seller says, you know what, I think we're just going to move forward and not do any repairs. So now the buyer has the ability to have it restored themselves, but the seller has to initiate that claim first, okay? So buyer to communicate with the insurer. Buyer may either A, proceed with closing and be entitled to the amount of the insurance proceeds relating to the real property improvements, if any, payable to seller under all policies insuring the improvements, plus receive a credit from the seller at closing in an amount equal to the deductible not covered by the insurance. Or B, terminate the contract, thereby releasing all parties from liability hereunder. So if the seller turns the funds over to the buyer at closing, and then the buyer decides, you know, I'm only going to make a few improvements, we're not going to do the rest, we're just going to pocket the money, that could potentially be a problem. Because if they have more damage to the home at some point, the insurance company may not insure it. So the buyer needs to understand that if they're going to do it and they collect the insurance money, then they need to restore it back to its original condition. Okay. If all the aforementioned insurance information is received by the buyer or selling broker more than 10 days prior to the scheduled closing date, buyers to give written notification to seller or listing broker as to his election of A or B above within 10 days after the buyer or selling broker receipt of such information. And if not received by buyer or selling broker more than 10 days prior to the scheduled closing date, buyer may, at buyer's option, and by written notice to the seller or listing broker, extend the closing date up to 10 days. So they're giving them an extension because of the situation, okay? During which time buyer may make his election as to A or B above. Failure by buyer to notify the seller shall constitute an election to terminate the contract. So remember, A and B, A was to proceed with the closing and be entitled to the amount of the insurance proceeds relating to the improvements. Or B, let's see where, terminate the contract and releasing all parties from any liability. So if the contract is terminated in accordance with the provisions of this paragraph, buyer's earnest money is to be returned subject to paragraph 12. Seller agrees to reimburse buyer's cost to pay for title, survey, inspection, and appraisal. So in other words, the buyer can be reimbursed for those items from the seller if that happens. So any questions or comments?
I think the buyer's first reaction is to terminate the contract. In many cases, you know, it's like things like fire or flooding or bad storms like we've had on Friday. But not necessarily does the buyer need to terminate the contract. He needs, or she needs, or they need to find out how much insurance they can get to cover those items, because sometimes the insurance is more than what it's going to cost to fix those items. So, yeah.
Right. Thank you, Norm. So years ago, I sold a property in Union, Missouri. It was a pretty decent sized home, and it had a detached garage to it. And there wasn't necessarily a storm right then and there, but when the inspections took place, they noticed that the roofs had lots of hail damage on them, and they were able to note back when that storm was. So when the seller, so I had the buyer, the seller, I had called the listing agent and said, hey, you know, before we send this inspection notice over, I want to let you know that they're going to ask for a new roof because there's hail damage on the roof. And I said, you might want to encourage your sellers to go ahead and call their insurance company right away and get somebody out there to inspect it. So they filed a claim. In the end, the buyer and seller got a brand new roof on the house and the detached garage. However, the seller was not going to do it. They handed over the funds at closing. They handed over 50% of the funds at closing. And then once the buyer completed the roof, they handed over the other half of that. So, but that came straight from the insurance company. So it all worked out. So there's a lot of different situations. Like Norm said, flooding. You know, we had a listing up in, I think it was University City, that flooded the other year. If you all remember that flood. Anyways, the basement filled up with water. It wasn't in a flood zone, but the basement filled up with water. And so it was under contract. And so we had the listing, and the seller said, well, we will go ahead and restore it prior to closing. Well, the buyer complained and said, no, it's not exactly the way it was after they restored it prior to closing. And, you know, we brought out pictures from the MLS to show them, yes, this is exactly how it was. So it worked out, and the buyer moved forward and bought the property. So we always got to try to make sure that we can encourage our buyers that anything can be fixed, right? Or maybe it's a monetary thing and the buyer can take care of it on their own afterwards, because then they can hire who they want and have it done the way they want, right? So there's always ways to get through situations like this. Does anybody here have a property that was listed or a buyer was buying or leasing that was damaged in the storm on Friday?
I do. I have a property that once again, I was getting ready to list, and I can't list it now because the roof is gone and the windows are out.
Oh, no.
And
Okay.
I have another client that's around the corner that I'm already under contract. We just received an offer. We received two offers last week. We were going to go over them. In fact, we're going to go over them today. When I was actually doing an open house Saturday and Sunday. Went in on Saturday, no electricity. There's some shingles missing. But the good thing about that one, there's only some shingles missing off the roof. So she's already called the insurance company. But when you go around the corner, the rest of the street looks a hot mess. So I canceled the open house on Sunday. Didn't do that on Sunday because we barely got through on Saturday with no electricity. It was still cool in the house, but. So yeah, this is the second time now that I've had getting ready to list properties and.
Yeah. So the one that you were going to list that the roof is gone and the windows are broken, have you talked to the seller? Are they planning to, bless you, are they planning to restore it?
So actually, I actually went by there after I left the open house on Saturday, and saw everything. There was already people there taking down the trees and assisting them to do what they needed to do. And yes, they are, they're doing everything they can. They have a GoFundMe account that's already started. They are diligently doing everything they need to do to move forward.
Good. And
but
you
the
stay in
problem I
touch.
have now though, Lori, is who's going to want to buy in that area it looks like a war zone in that area.
It will get cleaned up. I understand what you're saying, but every property is sellable. Right now might not be the best time because they may not get top dollar for it once they restore it, but it's going to take time for them to restore it. And you might be surprised if things start to build up and become nice again. Some people may not move back. They may just sell the lot, who knows, but stay in touch with them. And, and if there's anything that you can do to help them out, I would recommend it, but everything is sellable, and just nurture them and stay in contact with them.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything that they would like to share or ask?
I listed a 4-family right over here in Maplewood, and it got under contract. And a week before closing, there was a fire that destroyed the whole building. Thank God nobody was hurt. But the building was completely destroyed. And I sat down with the buyer and I said, what would you like to do? He said, I want to terminate the contract, of course. And I said, well, let's look at the insurance. Let's look at the insurance and see how much insurance money they have to cover this. And it turned out that there was more insurance money than what they were paying for the 4-family. So they got the insurance money and they got the lot. So it turned out a lot better than what they thought would happen. The lot is still there and they still have their insurance money.
Good. Well, they can do with it what they want now, right? Bill, is there anything you'd like to share this morning?
No, just I'm glad everybody's safe, and really sad to see what that was like. So
yeah,
interesting. Coming through, left Colorado in a snowstorm, came down to Denver into warm weather, and then came home to a storm. So I'm like, okay, this is really weird.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, everyone, you have a great day. And if you need anything, please reach out to Bill or I, and welcome back, Bill. And we will all see you soon. I am in the Washington office today working. So if you need anything, give me a call, text me, email me, whatever you need. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.